Welcome back to the Marvel Movie Minute, a daily podcast in which we explore the films of the Marvel Cinematic Universe 1 minute at a time. In this, our fourth season, we're looking at Kenneth Branagh's 2011 film, Thor. I'm Matthew Fox from theethicalpanda.com.
And I'm Andy Nelson from the Next Reel Film Podcast.
And today we're talking about minute 66, which begins with Loki staring up at the sky and ends with Selvig being a very bad liar. Joining us on the show today, we have Bryon Lockhart, host of the Marine Corps Movie Minute and co-host of the Marvel Events Timeline podcasts. Bryon, it's so good to have you with us today. What got you into the whole movie by minutes idea?
I started out listening to Star Wars Minute. That was the big one. Nice. And just from there, I kept finding that every movie I liked had a movies by minutes, pretty much. And but a few of the other movies by minutes members kind of stated, hey, look, if there's a movie you like that doesn't have a movies by minutes podcast, then it's on you to do it yourself. Given that I was in the Marines, and given that I love the movie Heartbreak Ridge by Clint Eastwood, I'm like, I think I found my movie. So I tapped a fellow Marine buddy of mine, and we went through Heartbreak Ridge minute by minute. And we keep promising Full Metal Jacket, but it hasn't happened yet.
No, yeah, I saw that that's what you all do, and I was thinking movies that feature the Marine Corps, that, depending on how you define it, that's a very broad category.
Oh, yeah. Unfortunately, we were actually my current co-host, Perry, my main co-host, he absolutely refused to do the WWE Marine movies with John Cena and all the other wrestlers. He was like, I will not do those. So my attempt was to, when he's available, recruit another Marine buddy of mine, and we are going to go through those eventually.
Listen, not everyone's up to discussions of high cinema like that, and you just got to find your right person. So, well, we're so glad to have you with us today, and we're going to get into all that after this quick moment.
Hey there, all you wonderful Marvel Movie Minute fans. We would love to have you hop into the conversation with us to talk more about Thor, the minutes we're covering, really anything going on in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We just love talking about all of it. We have a growing group of Marvel fans just waiting to chat with you over in our Discord server. To find out more about Discord and to get to our server, just go to truestory.fm/Marvel Movie Minute. And you click on the Discord link. It's as easy as that. See you over there.
We start this minute with Loki looking up to the sky. And for me, this is a really interesting moment because we've had so much of, Thor just coming to realize he can't lift the hammer anymore. He's looking up at Odin. He's looking at Heimdall just with all the emotions he's going through in that moment. Loki obviously is in a very different place. What do you think is in his head when he's looking up? What do you think he's looking at?
I don't know. For me personally, I think he's kind of looking at like, oh, good one, Odin. Because he made his attempt and failed, just like all the rednecks who were out there earlier, the mortals. Well, I shouldn't say rednecks, but
we call them townies in these
townies. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, that's perfect. and. I think he kind of, because the little bit where he looks up and he's like, and then fixes his coat all very gently and properly and walks off. I just think it's like, oh, good one.
What I love about the moment, and I find really interesting, is we have seen so many God's eye view shots throughout the film where the camera is like directly overhead, looking straight down at whether it's Thor or other action that's happening. And I find it really interesting in this particular case that we don't flip up to that God's eye view shot to look down at Loki as he's looking up. And I can't help but feel like maybe it's because we're oftentimes when we're in those shots, it does feel like we're Heimdall looking straight down. In fact, just in the last week, we had a shot where Thor was looking straight up. And we have that God's eye view shot, and it comes right out of the top of this kind of the cube here, and it cuts to Heimdall, who is watching, in fact.
Right.
And so, they probably would have made it feel like Heimdall is watching Loki if they had used that particular shot. And I feel like by keeping the camera really low, it's intentionally saying Loki isn't in a place where Heimdall can notice what he's actually doing right now. And I think that is kind of interesting because we know from that, I feel like, he's up to his old tricks. There's something going on here.
And that's something not in these minutes, but we will get confirmed later in the movie, is that Heimdall couldn't see Loki during this time.
Yeah. And also, I find it so interesting that they choose to have him just walk out of the shot as opposed to doing something magical at this point, right? Because my sense is it's easier when you're making a movie. You know what? Instead of having to, we'll save so much money in creating those shots if we just have you walk out of frame. And I can totally see them as they're trying to figure out which effects do they keep in, which are getting too expensive. And they just, Branagh is saying, you know what, we'll just have you walk out of frame. We don't need to show that.
I also think, though, the more I think about it, we've been talking throughout this whole movie, and Bryon, definitely curious on your thoughts on this as well, on what are the limits of Loki's magic? That we keep hearing that most of what happens on Asgard isn't magic, it's just science, but that we humans think of as magic. Loki's not that. Loki is magic. They specifically named that. And I feel like, on the one hand, I want to know, how did he get to Earth? How did he get back? Is this just a projection? Is he physically there? He seems to be, because he can pull the hammer. But the more I think about it, the more I feel like sometimes when you explain the magic too much, it kind of comes being able to read the spell description in a D&D book. It's well, it's not magic anymore. Now I know exactly what it is and what it's not. And I think even if it is just for the production values, I feel like I like not knowing how Loki's doing this, because it allows him to feel it keeps the idea that he is mysterious and trickstery and magical in a way that no one else in Asgard is.
I think it's meant to be magic, although the line early on when they said, or at what point when they say, I come from a place that's magic, science and magic are the same thing, basically. And I think that was thrown in there because in these early phases of the MCU, they were unsure of what they had, because, Iron Man was an easier sell because that's technology. Hulk is kind of an easy sell, too, because it's science gone wrong. But Thor is Norse mythology and magic and gods and all this crazy stuff. And they're like, well, how are we going to sell it? Well, actually, it's just science that we don't understand, right? So it's our primitive minds can't handle what they're doing. But I think we'll learn later as we go through the MCU, they no longer care about trying to ground it into ultimate reality. Right. They unleash the silliness and the wackiness. And we do learn that Loki, his mom was raised by witches, and she taught that to him, right. So he's doing magic. Also, I think there's a line where he mentions there are pathways that are kind of forgotten or unknown besides the Bifrost. And it's kind of like Heimdall doesn't know about them. So in a way, you can kind of explain that he just knows these secret passages, not necessarily using magic to teleport.
Yeah.
Well, that's because that's how he somehow snuck the Jotuns into Asgard, right? Is through one of these back doors that we still don't exactly understand, but apparently it is there. And it's interesting that in the script, it actually is written. It says an odd green and gold light rises from the ground, enveloping him. Then he disappears. And I don't know. I guess I'm torn. Do I need that? Or, kind of what you're both alluding to, the fact that there's magic, we know he's magical, he walks out of frame, it almost keeps it more mysterious that we don't actually see whatever these back doors are, right?
Yeah, I think that's where I am on the mysteriousness, especially because, and this kind of to shift the other thing about this moment I wanted to talk about, to me, the real focus here is not just how does he get in and out, it's what's happening in this moment. Because for me, the way he kind of come to terms with he can't lift the hammer, and like you said, Bryon, he buttons up his coat, he kind of goes back. This is such an important moment because for me, it reminds me of a line that I've heard actually in the TV show West Wing, but it's a theme that you often hear is, the character asks, do you want to win or do you want to defeat your opponent? And I think for Loki, that's kind of what he's going through here is his goal to become recognized as the smart person, the good ruler that he thinks he could be, or is his goal to defeat Thor? And he's mostly kind of accepted, I'm the ruler now. I'm going to take power. I'm going to solidify my power. I'm going to have some fun twisting Thor's tail and twisting the knife in him a little bit. And then he sees the hammer. And there's just one moment where he's like, maybe I can have this definitive proof that I'm actually better than Thor. He tries to lift the hammer. And to me, I think this moment is where he's like, he could get into his head of like, damn it, I even can't lift the hammer. Dad still doesn't love me. Like all that stuff. And this is where he's kind of like, nope, I don't need to be that anymore. Am I just projecting like crazy here? Or did you all see any of that in this moment as well?
I like the way that you kind of described that. I mean, I don't know if I read it that way, but I do kind of like it. It does feel like there's a little thing there, because I mean, he doesn't fall to his knees in being distraught and, upset like Thor because he can't lift it. I mean, I don't know. It's just something like, yep. I don't know. It's just kind of like him being okay with it and just moving on to go do other things.
It's like the hammer was never his. So you could see why Thor was particularly distraught, because not only did he lose his hammer, but Odin took his powers away. He's just immortal at this point. Loki still has his powers. Right. He's ascended to the throne. And I kind of think it was just not like a crime, but a crime of opportunity. Hey, it's there. Let me just see if I can lift it. I've ascended to the throne. I'm quote unquote worthy. And then he's like, I'm not. oh, well, it was never mine to begin with. So it would have been nice, but
yeah, right. Nice bonus.
I think that's the key, because for me, a big part of Loki's journey has been about, who in whose eyes does he want to be worthy? And I think to me, this is like, I know Loki's kind of the villain at this point, but to me, there's something like really kind of powerful and self-affirming about the idea of like, I don't need to try and set my worthiness by someone else's standards. I'm going to just be like, I'm doing good. I'm king of Asgard. That's all I need. So, all right, enough of my projection of my father issues onto Loki here. Let's kind of move on. We get this wonderful shot that I want to hear what both of you think of, where Stillwell is kind of moving into the command center. Sitwell, thank you. And he walks from the outside where it's very dark into the inside. Does that strike you as well as this kind of very interesting shot of him moving like from such a stark darkness into light? Or is that just him moving inside?
Well, I mean, moving from the command center, he is inside, but it's the dark command center, the very,
right.
I don't know, secretive, I guess we'll call it, place where all the agents are, working in the dark on all of their little computers and everything, into this bright white room, which is such a different look. I really like that look, and it's a great kind of trucking move that we have, kind of walking with him, going from one to the other. And I don't know, for me, in context of who we learn or what we learn about Sitwell later in the franchise, I just find it to be an interesting kind of shot construction that he's in the darkness, but he's stepping into the light so that he can talk with Coulson. Like, I think there's something kind of interesting in that. I can't imagine they were projecting that far ahead as far as Sitwell and his loyalties, but it is a very intriguing shot. And I think largely it's just one of those things that probably Branagh and his cinematographer came up with and said, oh, this would be a fun thing to do, just kind of playing with that. So, yeah, I like the look.
I think that's the fun thing about going back and rewatching these early phases of the MCU, knowing what we know, is you can pick out stuff like that. And it's like, oh, like I said, I guarantee that was just, hey, this is just a shot. Like the whole complex kind of reminds me of, I don't know, kind of like E.T., when the feds came in, that kind of plastic, and it's bright there, and obviously we want to be able to see what's happening in that area. But now, like you said, now going back, knowing what we know about Sitwell, knowing what we know about Coulson, it's the light and the dark of S.H.I.E.L.D., and it's just it's fun to go back and say, hey, maybe there was something there, even though we know that probably wasn't. It was too early. It was too early in the MCU to connect all that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know that huge book of like behind the scenes stuff with Marvel has now come out. I've not gotten a chance to look at it, but to any fans who are listening, I'd be very curious if it says anything about when they decided to make Sitwell a villain, and if it was like early here or if it was, some later person like rewatched some of the stuff and was like, Sitwell comes off as kind of villainous. You want to play with that? Like I'd love to hear like what the thinking there was.
Right.
And so here we have some S.H.I.E.L.D. agents walking around in the background, and we actually hear someone say the word set, which, Andy, talk to us about kind of what we're seeing and what we hear in that moment.
Well, it's a strange moment. So, yeah, so we see him. I mean, so Sitwell lets him know that Thor has a visitor. And then we cut to this shot of S.H.I.E.L.D. agents walking. We're back in the hamster cage. And again, just as a side note, very frustrating how difficult it is trying to identify any of these people. I just can't tell. There aren't enough of them credited. Mm-hmm. And so it makes it hard and frustrating because I just can't pull them out. But we see some S.H.I.E.L.D. agents. We see a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent walking toward us through the hamster cage, some others wheeling stuff. And then the camera starts panning over to, there's a S.H.I.E.L.D. scientist who's busy repairing the torn wall of the hamster cage where Thor had kicked an agent out. And yeah, and we hear a voice say set. And I can't help but thinking that's oftentimes like what the assistant director will call out when, like, to make sure everyone's, set in their places before they call action. And it's very faint. And I was like, is it the S.H.I.E.L.D. agents saying something to each other, or was that the actual assistant director saying set before the camera panned over, letting Stellan Skarsgård, all the actors know you need to be in place because the camera's moving now, so make sure you're standing in your place. It was strange for me to hear that, because instantly my brain goes into production mode going, oh, are we hearing the production team? They would have cleaned that up, but maybe they left it because they didn't think people would think that it was related to the production, but related to the S.H.I.E.L.D. agents. I don't know. It's very strange. Did either of you notice that?
No, I didn't catch that, but I also didn't catch Gene's guy in Mandalorian until it hit the internet, so it's possible.
Yeah, there's definitely little moments like that. I didn't catch it at first, but once you said it, I went back and watched the actual movie itself in that moment and noticed the word set doesn't appear in the subtitles. So
no, yeah, right.
I think it may well be they may well have had some maybe they're saying are we all set to deal with this person coming in, some way to explain it in universe if a editor later caught it and was like, oops. Who knows? But we get to one of my favorite scenes in the movie where Selvig is trying to explain to Coulson that this guy is actually Donald Blake, Dr. Donald Blake, both a doctor and a physicist, as we will find out. Selvig's lying through his teeth. And we can kind of go over it moment by moment. But I just want to start by asking, why is Selvig doing this? The last thing we saw was Jane leaving a message for him, and then now we cut to this. What's happening here?
No, the last thing we saw was Jane and him arguing about the fact that he's in jail now.
Oh no, you were correct. Thank you.
Right, and that's when Darcy, they're looking at the book, and
Darcy
says it could be, he could be. They would have thought he was, a god, and that was the last thing that we saw. So obviously there was some convincing that had happened. It's a surprising. I mean, I'm curious about several things. The fact that he does it, I guess it's because he was the one who knew more about S.H.I.E.L.D. than she did. He was kind of he's friends with Banner and Pym and has a sense of S.H.I.E.L.D. and so maybe was trying to use some of his knowledge about S.H.I.E.L.D. to kind of come in here. But I also find it strange that she doesn't come along. Why is it just him? I don't know. It was a very curious thing to just have Erik being the sole person who comes to do this.
My guess is he didn't want her there. He's very much a father figure. He is very much protective of her, and he just got her from there and doesn't want her around. She also clearly was hot-headed the last time she dealt with S.H.I.E.L.D., so he figures, all right, I'll go handle it.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. This keeps her more off of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s radar. He kind of knows that once S.H.I.E.L.D. notices you, that can be bad long term. He's towards the end of his career. She's at the very start.
Now, my other question about this whole thing is why Donald Blake with him? Other than, obviously, the story from the production side is obviously it was his alias in the comics, but as we know, in context of the film itself, Donald Blake was Jane's ex. He wasn't very good with relationships, all of that. But did Erik know him? Did he see the name tag? Why does Donald Blake, why is that the name that sticks in his head? Did he know Donald back when they were all at Culver University together? I just like it was strange for him to pull that one out. I mean, I guess it was just or is Darcy the one that pulled it out and opted to use that when apparently, as we learned, creating this fake driver's license? Like, where did the whole plan to stick with the Donald Blake come from? I don't know. Did that strike either of you, or is it just like, it's his comic book name?
Well, of course, that was the main genesis, as you stated. Like, they wanted to get the reference in there because they're not doing the alter ego. You know, Thor is Thor.
Sure.
I kind of appreciate that because, especially when we're dealing with, you know, the way they set it up in the MCU, that they're aliens, basically, you don't need the alter ego. But I thought early on when she took his photo in the diner, that was the whole genesis of the kind of going by Donald Blake, or I don't know if they actually, I can't remember. I just literally watched it last night. Did they explain that?
It was only the name tag on the shirt that Jane loaned him, and it had, "Hello, my name is Donald Blake, MD," because it was her ex's shirt, and she took that off. But that was the only time that it's come up.
I guess the thought I had was the fact that she had that stuff with her in the New Mexico at this space was that Blake had been at one point involved in this project. You know, certainly they studied together at Culver U, and here we're getting some stuff from comics and the like. But my impression was that Selvig would have known him, both in terms of like this person who he is kind of a father figure, mentor to, would have told him like, you know, hey, I'm dating this guy, it's fun, or oh, we've broken up now. But yeah, that was really my impression, is that he got it. But also, it's funny because I wish we had some idea of how they get this driver's license, because I thought at first maybe like somehow she had his old driver's license and they just put a new picture on it.
Put a new photo. Okay, yeah.
I don't have that many exes of mine who I've left with driver's licenses, so I don't. But Mr. Donald Blake apparently has his head in the clouds, so we don't know. You know, Jane seems the sort who might maliciously keep a left wallet that was left behind and not give it back. I got nothing there. But yeah, it seems to me like they wanted the comic book thing, and then to have kind of a like, they can sort of justify it with all this other stuff.
Well, if they didn't get their stuff taken because of, you know, S.H.I.E.L.D. was eventually going to arrest them for stolen identity anyways, you know, for identity theft. But I guess for my thing is likely off screen while Selvig was driving out, you know, what is it, 50 miles away. So they had some time to maybe kind of put together something on the fly on the internet. And it clearly S.H.I.E.L.D. was not buying it. So they didn't do that good of a job.
Oh, no. Yeah.
And so that's one of my questions is Coulson is obviously acting as though he's sort of acting like he believes Erik, but he's kind of like, well, but then explain this to me. How did he kick the butt of all our agents? Is he a medical doctor or a physicist? Halfway through, we see that Coulson sees that the license is fake. Before that, do you think there's a moment when Coulson believes a word of this, or is he just from the moment letting this guy lie to him to kind of, you know, give him rope and see where he goes with it?
Oh, I would say I don't think he ever bought it. I think he knew from the get-go that this was all shenanigans. I think they even have a theory who Thor is. But they deal in reality, and that's kind of myth. So they're like, they want to know, all right, is there more to it? But already, because when he's like, I want to see what happens, he already suspects something's up with Thor. Because they know crazy stuff is in this universe at this point. I don't think he ever believed Selvig. He just wanted to see where this goes. You know, what are they up to, and what can I learn from them?
It makes me wonder, like, if Erik also is kind of like, because I mean, he seems to have a good sense about how S.H.I.E.L.D. operates. Like, it makes me wonder if he also kind of senses that they're not buying his lies, but that is he going to suspect that they're going to be followed now? Like, where is his head with all of this? Or does he actually think he is getting away with all of this?
I think he's kind of halfway in between. I think it's that kind of moment where like you fully expect the teacher to be like, come on, that's not true. But they're not doing that. So you think maybe I can pull this off. And to me, it's funny because his lies just keep getting more and more extreme. And he's able to come up with them on the fly, but they're really bad.
Yeah.
Steroids. Yeah, he's a bit of a fitness nut.
That was great.
Yeah.
Great line.
Like
so
that just
funny.
explains his training, his fighting style, his ability, all that. He just takes steroids. He does CrossFit. He's good. That's all.
And I love that one moment where his actual opinions about S.H.I.E.L.D. come out a bit, where he says,
Right.
he was so upset at this big faceless organization like yours coming in with his jackbooted thugs. And Coulson kind of gives him a look, and he's clearly like, oh, I mean, that's what he said.
Right.
That is a great moment by Stellan Skarsgård, because he when he says jackbooted thugs, he's got some vitriol behind it. And Coulson's look is like, excuse me? What did you just say? And he catches himself and he's like, well, that's how he put it. And it's perfect. It's a great scene.
It's so funny. And just as a side note, I don't know if we're closing the loop on this, but Coulson does in fact say Dr. Selvig, not Selvage. Mm-hmm. So at least we know, people are saying Selvig, even if, they're mispronouncing it, which, we may never know.
And then we get the driver's license, which there's a lot of interesting stuff on it. There's something about the address that I want to talk about, but before we get into that, Andy, do you have stuff about the driver's license you wanted to point out?
Yeah, it's a New York State driver's license. I'm not sure why, other than perhaps, as you said, maybe this was Donald's driver's license and they just put a picture on it, and which would mean all of this information would be Donald's, not necessarily something that Darcy created for Thor. They made up the birth date November 21st, 1984, so presumably he'd be about 25 at the time this would be happening in the MCU. It's a Class D license, which is just the standard 18 and older driver's license in New York. And I couldn't help but think how odd it was that the actual New York State driver's license, and maybe this is why they picked New York, it actually does say Excelsior on it. And I was like, what are the odds of that working so well for that? So I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, I love that little detail. For myself, as a New York City resident, I wanted to dive more into this address because, as far as I knew, there is no Doberson Street. The address is 1123 Doberson Street, New York, 10023. Now, a couple things are interesting here. New York, that means it's specifically Manhattan, because also it would be often like Brooklyn, New York, or, a neighborhood in Queens or the Bronx or something like that. 10023, I know that zip code. That's a zip code I grew up in. So that zip code is actually the Upper West Side of Manhattan, kind of mid to Upper West Side, around like the 50s, 60s, 70s. It's where Lincoln Center is now. It's where West Side Story would have taken place back in the day, though the new one's coming out pretty soon. But Doberson Street is not a name that I've ever heard of, certainly not in that neighborhood. I did some Googling. It's not a street that appears anywhere in New York City. And so I was kind of wondering, is there some significance to this? I couldn't find anything, and I went down a pretty good rabbit hole so if anyone knows why they chose that address, please let me know. The one thing I did find is something called Target Aquarius, which is a book that was written by a gentleman named Scott Beringer, who is quite convinced that I couldn't tell at first if this book was a parody or was real. It turns out I think it is quite real. It is, someone who has a lot of conspiracy theories and who has become convinced that Marvel and the Disney Corporation are making movies specifically to tell him that they are satanic. And he has a whole numerology about how Donald, I think, is his middle name. And he does a numerology thing with the numbers of 1123 and also the numerical equivalence of Doberson Street to prove that the movie was specifically made to send a demonic message to him.
Holy cow.
That's the rabbit hole I went down. If someone else has something a little closer to the mainland about why this address is what it is, please let me know. But I did feel like if I had to go down this rabbit hole, I had to take you all with me.
I think you nailed it. I don't think any further information is required. I think you solved it.
There you go.
That is crazy stuff. Wow. The only other thing I had, which isn't nearly as interesting, but the photo of Thor, I was asking myself, where did they get this photo from? And then I was like, oh, of course, this is when Thor is stuffing his face in Isabella's diner, eating all those pancakes, and Darcy takes that picture with her phone. So if you look at that moment, this is that same smile that he gives her in that moment.
which is such a ridiculous mugging, like, hi, here I am, but is exactly what Thor would do if he ever had to go to a DMV himself. So I do believe that would be a driver's license photo.
Probably.
It's a good callback from a funny moment earlier in the movie.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Definitely. And then one other thing also that's interesting is that Coulson must have great vision here because the computer screen's at the other side of the room, and he sees that occupation physician is on there. So that's just kind of one little
so tiny,
fun moment.
Right. So
maybe he's got another screen of it mirrored near him or something like that.
Or maybe there's more about Coulson that we just don't know yet.
Yeah. Or he could have looked at the license before they kind of plugged it all into the computer. But.
Well, it's interesting because it's not on his license. Like, that's additional information that like somehow pulls up. It's like written on the screen underneath the license. So it's somehow they grabbed that information. I don't know where, but they must be they must be somehow tapping into information about the real Donald Blake to get that information.
Right. Could be.
Yeah.
Well, so I think that's about where we end. From either of you, any last things about this minute you wanted to bring up?
No, I'm good.
Just a couple things. We get our techie back. We had him earlier talking to Sitwell about the Southwest flight. This is, again, Blake Silver, who is the one who's looking at the driver's license. And then I finally figured out where this holding cell is. The holding cell, it's just a temporary one because it really is kind of a pass-through room that we see Coulson use earlier when he's going into the hamster cage. And there's a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent who kind of opens up the door for him there because there's a sliding glass door on the opposite side or on the back wall of this holding cell, and that's where he goes through to get into the hamster cage. So yeah, it's interesting how compact all of this is, but how they end up really finding use for kind of every little space. So I thought that was pretty effective.
Well, one thing I was wondering, maybe you can tell me, are any parts of this holding cell sort of open? Like, are any parts of the walls of the holding cell the walls of the hamster cage itself, or is it all internal?
It's all, it's not internal. Like the wall right behind Thor is actually a like the side exterior wall of this actual command center trailer that they're in. Okay. And in fact, in a later minute, we'll actually see that it looks like they're opening the blinds or something afterward, because it looks like it's just slats that they must close when they're using it in this particular context. But yeah, it doesn't run up against the hamster cage itself.
Okay. I just asked because we've seen that it's so easy to just bust through the wall of the hamster cage, Kool-Aid Man style. So I was going to say, I was going to poke fun a bit if they had that as a wall of the holding cell, but they don't. So there's some good thinking.
Well, they don't even have Thor in cuffs or anything. So yeah, they're being very laissez-faire about all of this in this moment.
They know a broken man when they see him, so he's not going anywhere.
Yes, they do.
His shame are his handcuffs in this moment. So. All right. Well, Bryon, it's been so great having you on. Really looking forward to having you on every day this week. For people who want to hear more about you, tell us more about the Marine Corps Movie Minute, where they can find it.
Yeah, just the Marine Corps Movie Minute. We're hosted on Pinecast, so you can just Google that, and we're, of course, on social media as a Marine Corps Movie Minute podcast.
Awesome. Well, cool. Thank you so much. Looking forward to have you on. And to all of our listeners, as always, let us know what you think, give us feedback, and have a great day.
Until next time, true believers.
Marvel Movie Minute is a production of True Story FM, engineering by Andy Nelson. This season's music is One Last Ride by Martin Puringer. Find the show at truestory.fm. And if your podcast app allows ratings and reviews, consider doing that for this show.